My name is Meg Sheehan. I'm coordinator of the North American Megadam Resistance Alliance. We're a coalition of organizations and individuals whose mission is to protect rivers and their communities by resisting megadams and their transmission corridors. I'll be speaking about imports of Canadian hydropower to New York City via the Champlain-Hudson Power Express transmission corridor, or CHPE. This is a transmission corridor that runs from the Canadian border near and down Lake Champlain on the New York side of Lake Champlain, down the river. It is buried under the river and under the Hudson River and ends up in Astoria, Queens. And I will talk about Canadian hydropower, how it's produced, and the impacts on the communities and the rivers themselves. As this map shows, Canada has a vast complex of hydropower generating facilities. There are many transmission corridors that are being proposed as export corridors to the US, all claiming that this is clean and green and renewable energy. CHPE is one of them. You can see that it's coming down into New York, and this also gives you an idea of the vast distances that this hydropower travels. Here's another map showing some of the larger Canadian hydropower dams across this area. In Eastern Canada, Hydro-Quebec has over 63 large generating stations with large impoundments or reservoirs. These reservoirs and these facilities are not just one dam, but consist of a system of dikes and diversions and dams that flood vast areas. In some cases, for one of the dams, the La Grande Dam on the Hudson Bay, 27,000 square miles are diverted and diked to get the water into the reservoir because the land is so flat. You can see that there are vast distances between where the electricity is used in Boston and New York, and in the Northeast. That's over 1,200 miles of transmission corridors and installations across the land. This is what some of the dams look like. This is an issue across Canada. In British Columbia, the Site C Dam is very problematic and over budget. Much like all of the dams, they're economically unsupportable in Canada, except for the fact that they are all owned by state-owned monopolies. So the provinces have the exclusive rights to divert and dam rivers to produce hydropower, much like the Canadian provinces have exclusive rights over oil and gas and mineral extraction. So water is just another resource extraction source of revenue for the Canadian provincial governments. The power that's coming down into New York City is coming from Labrador and from Quebec. This is the site of one of the most recent dams that was built by Nalcor Energy in Labrador, the second dam on the Churchill River. The first dam that was built and started operation in the 1970s produces about 1/6 of the power supply that's exported to the US. This was a very sacred spot to the Indigenous community in Labrador. The dam was built over their opposition, and not all of the community provided consent. Dams are under construction for export. In Quebec province, Hydro-Quebec is building the Romaine River Dam complex. 3 of them are completed and producing electricity. This was also very controversial with the Indigenous community that this dam and the export corridors were built on. This gives you an idea of what these dams entail in terms of their construction. Muskrat Falls is about $13 billion. You can see that the Romaine, which is smaller, was $6 billion. So these are very costly infrastructure projects. The impacts of the dams on rivers include downstream impacts, the impacts of the dam itself that blocks fish migration and disrupts the flow of sediments and water downstream to our oceans. And the reservoirs, of course, dam the water. They collect the water there, and it's released artificially, not in sync with the river's natural flow. The water is heated up. When it goes downstream, it's warmer. The reservoirs themselves contribute to global warming and displace communities. This is an issue nationally, internationally, as these large dams are being promoted as clean and green over the protests of local communities. A little known fact is that but much studied fact is the fact that these dams, by flooding organic material, cause mercury to be released where it enters the water and undergoes a biological process, creating toxic methylmercury that then enters the food chains. And in these remote subarctic areas where the dams are located, communities rely on wild-caught foods for survival. A 2016 Harvard study showed that of the 22 dams, new dams proposed for Canada, most of them will expose Indigenous communities relying on wild foods to increases in methylmercury exposure. And these communities are already suffering from high levels of methylmercury due to the dams that have been in place for many decades. And so this is adding to the methylmercury exposure that these Indigenous communities and local communities will experience. Although Hydro-Quebec in Eastern Canada has made some contracts and agreements with some of the Indigenous communities, the Cree and the Cree in particular in Eastern Canada and Quebec. There are several other tribal nations or First Nations in Quebec and Labrador who do not have settlements with Hydro-Quebec over the use of their lands and the confiscation of their ancestral lands for the production of hydropower and for the transmission corridors. And recently, 3 new First Nations, the Innu, Atikamekw, and Anishinaabeg, have formed a new coalition. Their website is very helpful and contains a lot of information. That's QuebecHydroclash.ca. And they are opposing the export of Canadian hydropower to New York via CHPE, claiming that the companies that are exporting this power, Hydro-Quebec, the state-owned monopoly that they actually call a state-run extortion scheme, and Blackstone, owner of CHPE and promoter of CHPE, are profiting at their expense. And they are claiming that they should be able to share in those profits. And as a result of hydropower development on their ancestral lands, their people live in poverty. They are asserting that the dams violate their human rights, treaties, and the Canadian Constitution. In addition, the Innu of Labrador are suing over the disruption to land and culture caused by the Churchill Falls Dam, which is on the Churchill River upstream from the Muskrat Falls Dam, and it is also upstream from the proposed Gull Island Dam. The Innu Nation is seeking $4 billion in compensation for the use of their land for this power that is being exported to the US. And their website is 50yearspastdue.ca. There's a lot of opposition continuing in Eastern Canada and Labrador, trying to stop the Gull Island Dam, which is going to be also proposed for export. The environmental review process in Canada is nowhere near what we might expect. And in fact, the dams are built for in perpetuity. They do not have relicensing like we have here. Most of the dams were built without environmental impacts or consultation. And this is really something that we need to address. There should be no hydropower in any clean energy plan, Green New Deal, or climate plan, even though it's long been considered a clean energy source. Hydropower can actually be bad for the climate, and in particular, Canadian hydropower and Hydro-Quebec's power is never been proven to be clean, green, or renewable. There's absolutely no data to support Hydro-Quebec's claim that the power generated from its 63 generating stations is either zero emissions, as it claims, or low carbon. So we're calling for a complete carbon accounting of the emissions from this power. And we also are calling for transparency and accountability around Indigenous rights and acknowledging that climate justice does not stop at the border. We should be taking into account the impacts of these dams on local communities in Canada. So we hope that New York will reject CHPE. It's a bad deal for the climate, a bad deal for the communities in Canada, undermines local renewable generation and production in New York, and will create only 27 jobs for New Yorkers at a cost of $3 billion. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Rachel. And like most of us, I try to be a good person. This secretive Hydro-Quebec business deal can still be abandoned. I'm going to try to convince you to stop it on moral grounds. By now, you have learned that Canadian production of electricity is through huge dams on Indian territory, that it keeps Native Canadians oppressed, unsure of when the government will strike again, confiscating a huge swath of their tribal land, possibly stirring up the bones of their ancestors, harming their health, denying them their typical food based on their hunting, fishing way of life, and causing great poverty and hunger. When Meg came to New York 2 winters ago to speak, a white woman from Labrador sat with her at a table along with a dignified Cree couple. The husband remarked, "We call this slow genocide." When I heard the word genocide, I was deeply moved, and I could not get the situation out of my mind. Love thy neighbor as thyself is the primal biblical commandment. I cannot name a great religion that does not consider this standard essential. At morning prayer, I take the commandment upon myself. In the Episcopal Book of Common Prayer, where my sister prays, the congregation recites, "Let us confess our sins against God and our neighbor." Residents of Canada are certainly among the neighbors we are called upon to love as ourselves in anyone's call to conscience. In our 21st century society, every decent secular person understands some things are so immoral and wrong, they are sinful. There is no other word for it. Our conscience tells us. How can I convince you this deal to purchase electricity from Canada is so immoral and wrong that it is sinful? I am about to observe Passover. For 8 days I will eat poor man's bread and reflect on my tribal history that starts with Pharaoh's plan for the genocide of my ancestors. Every male Hebrew baby was to be thrown into the Nile at birth, and the surviving population that had grown too large for Pharaoh was to continue the forced labor that he ordered, providing bricks for his pyramids. I am commanded to tell the story as if I personally was an escaping slave, and so are all the people at my table. This is happening to us now and to other people who need our help. It is not uncommon for Seder guests to talk about opportunities for charity and justice on this night that emphasizes compassion. There is one difference in the parallel with the modern Cree. Their oppression comes from an occupier. If the Cree tried to escape, where would they go? Another taste of bitterness that maintains itself on my palate. My Seder plate is a replica of a ceramic tray produced in Spain around 1492. Experts believe it was fabricated by Muslim neighbors because of the style and a spelling error. Seder plates are intended to carry key props for the annual Bible-inspired psychodrama. This year, alongside the lamb bone and the wet material I put out simulating bricks, I am adding 2 items to cry out for modern justice. First, a green magic marker to symbolize the greenwashing of the supposed clean renewable electricity. And second, a jar of typewriter whiteout to symbolize the conniving secrecy about this deal that left most of us with almost no way to protest. We can't dictate to Canada how to make its electricity. We can decline to purchase it. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kathleen, and I wanted to talk to you about why buying Hydro-Quebec electricity is lose-lose for the environment. Hydro-Quebec does not have enough energy to supply all the projects that they have committed to in the Northeast US. This is affirmed by Riverkeeper and by Meg's group NAMRA. This means that another dam or dams will be built to meet commitments. Building dams is highly destructive. Forests and other natural areas sequester carbon. When flooded, all the stored carbon in the vegetation above ground and all of this carbon below ground in the roots, the fungus, the small animals, and the insects begin to decompose, releasing carbon dioxide, methane, as well as producing the methylmercury that Meg spoke of. These emissions are significant and continue, especially in the shallow impoundments that are built by Hydro-Quebec. Shallow reservoirs have higher methane emissions than deep reservoirs because they have different physical properties and chemical properties. Hydro-Quebec's own data on 5 of their dams shows their electricity to be half as dirty as gas for the entire next century, but they keep this quiet. It's a worst case scenario. We destroy the largest area of landscape for hydropower with the highest emissions. These dams also damage the river downstream. When water is released, the force scours the river, eroding the banks, mixing in large amount of silt into the water column and uprooting pretty much all life in the river. The frequency of these big surges makes it impossible to have a living river. Why would we agree to the destruction of rivers, ecosystems in exchange for dirty energy? The energy industry has lied to us for decades, and they continue. They're still doing it. And our elected officials, for some reason, are accepting it. I don't want to accept it anymore, and I hope you agree with me.
Hi, my name is Lisa. Probably the most widely used justification for fracking was energy independence. How many times have we heard that we're the Saudi Arabia of gas? And in the name of energy independence, we got a network of polluting pipelines and power plants. But now we have an opportunity to produce our own local renewable energy from wind and sun and all the economic benefits that would come with that. So why would we want to lock ourselves into a 25-year contract to import energy from Canada? What happened to energy independence? Hydro-Quebec has been lobbying to sell their Megadam energy in the US for the past decade, and they finally managed to open the door, and they really want to get in. So much that they've spent $10 million meddling in Maine's elections, trying to squash the resistance to a high voltage transmission cable they plan to build through scenic forest land in the North Maine woods to bring energy to Massachusetts. State legislators in Maine have now proposed 3 bills to close the loophole allowing foreign interests to influence their local elections, which makes me wonder, where do our New York City mayoral candidates stand on bringing in dirty, racist Canadian hydro to New York? I vote for energy independence.
Hi, my name is Gilbert. I'm an entrepreneur. I settled in New York in the early 50s because of the opportunity offered by the state. New York State was a powerhouse then. We had the largest population and we're a leader in manufacturing. We were the economic engine of America. Today, upstate, we have few manufacturing jobs. We're 4th in population and 3rd in the economy. We're now at the beginning of a new economic renaissance, or we continue the slide we have been suffering for the past few years. And it's so easy to accomplish this rebirth for both upstate and the city. If we use this opportunity being created by the need for more renewable energy in the city that can generate jobs and reawaken our manufacturing mojo. Or we can follow our leaders in New York City and Albany and purchase the energy from Hydro-Quebec. Both City Hall and Albany have been negotiating for this outcome in total secrecy. And Cuomo and de Blasio are leading us into less jobs and less money staying in the state. Why would they choose a Canadian outfit over our own manufacturing capabilities, creating union jobs? They know we can make solar panels and wind turbines. What could motivate them if they both claim, I love New York?
Hello, my name is Catherine. In 1997, the Hudson River was designated as an American Heritage River and is one of the world's longest estuaries. The change of tide is felt all the way north to Albany. In 2013, the Two-Row Wampum event was formed to celebrate the 400th anniversary of the Dutch traveling up the Hudson River on the half moon and meeting the Haudenosaunee, the indigenous people who lived there. The indigenous created a wampum belt to seal the deal, their agreement to live together, honoring each other's customs and protecting the river, each traveling in their own boats, a row of natives and a row of non-natives. And that's what we did, starting in Albany, canoeing or kayaking to New York City. I started the paddle in my kayak in Beacon. We were 6 days and 5 nights on the river. Firsthand, we experienced its awesome beauty. And now it's up to us to uphold the Two-Row Wampum Agreement and protect the Hudson River. Recently, a good thing happened. A protected area in the Hudson was designated for the endangered ancient fish species, the Atlantic sturgeon, but we all know that water travels. 7 communities, as Meg mentioned, depend upon the Hudson River for their drinking water. Were the Champlain-Hudson Power Express, or CHPE, to be approved, laying the necessary cables would stir up the remaining PCBs left by GE and all the other chemicals and pollutants that have settled on the riverbed. We praise needed efforts to establish environmental justice, but if we mean what we say, we'll protect Canadian Indigenous people along the Hudson and all life living within its waters, and not build CHPE that would provide building owners renewable energy credits to avoid complying the intent of local law 97 to actually retrofit their buildings and reduce greenhouse gases. In summary, with thanks to all of our participants, we see that for moral, environmental, and economic reasons, we demand our leaders to stop negotiating with Hydro-Quebec for a PPA, a power purchase agreement, and do not build the Champlain-Hudson Power Express. Thank you.